Every little thing you think that you need. Every little thing you think that you need. Every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.
You're listening to the Minimalist Podcast with Joshua Fields Milburn and TK Coleman.
Thank you, Alabama. Hello, everybody. Today on the show, we are talking about the clutter that is often caused by different ideologies. Also, Ryan Nicodemus will be joining us on the private podcast this week to talk about all of that religious clutter from his childhood and the ways he continues to minimize the dogma from his past. But first, coming up on this free public minimal episode, a caller has a question about decluttering some of their spiritual accessories that might be cluttering their spiritual practice. And then we've got a lightning round question about our different thoughts on religion and spirituality. That's followed by our Right Here, Right Now segment and a listener tip. You can check out the full Maximal edition of episode 446. That's the full episode with Ryan Nicodemus, where we answer 5 times the questions and we dive deep into several simple living segments. That private podcast episode is out right now at patreon.com/theminimalist. You can also find the link down below. Your support keeps our podcast 100% advertisement free because sing along at home, y'all. Advertisements suck. Let's start with our callers. If you have a question or a comment for our show, we'd love to hear from you. Just give us a call. Our number is 406-219-7839 or email a voice recording right from your phone to podcast@theminimalists.com. Our first question today is from Cardinal.
Hey, Josh. Hey, TK. I'm Cardinal from Canada. I love your podcast. I listen to it every week. I usually watch it, but I am happy to switch to listening to you guys on Spotify instead. So I have a question I've been thinking over. I'm a practicing witch, and I've noticed that contemporary practices require a lot of stuff. Tarot decks, crystals, oracle decks, spell components, statues, herbs, candles, oils, you name it, it exists. I have about 13 tarot and oracle decks. I go over them regularly and kind of see what I'm using, see what I'm not using, and I often give them away because, sometimes they need a better home somewhere else. And, there's plenty of herbs around my house and crystals and things, which I don't use very much. I got a new job in the past year, and I ended up buying 8 small god and goddess statues just in the past year, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. These statues make me happy. My room looks beautiful. They bring me a lot of joy to look at. But I also think do I need all of these tarot card decks? Do I need all of these statues? So I've really been wondering how I can practice minimalism while also enjoying my spiritual practice. Thanks very much, guys.
TK, I've been waiting to do this episode with you because I know you and I have different views on spirituality and religion, but if you were to look at us on a Venn diagram, I suppose there's some overlap there as well. I'd love to figure out where that overlap is. One philosophy by which I live my life is that if an accessory does not markedly enhance an activity, i.e. it doesn't add value in some way, then it is clutter. Even if it's not necessarily getting in the way, if it's not enhancing the activity, then it's clutter by proxy, because eventually it will get in the way. I'm thinking about my own spiritual practice. I wouldn't call it this, but I've heard other people refer to it. I've been swimming every day. We haven't talked about this on the show yet, but every day I swim 30 laps in 30 minutes. And so I'll get in the pool, I'll do these laps at the local athletic club that we have in my community up in Ojai. And it's a non-chlorinated pool, so I'm really happy about that. It's ozone filtered. And when I go there are a few accessories that are really necessary for swimming. First, I have to put swimming trunks on because if I went there naked, it'd be a problem. Although if it was my own pool, I probably wouldn't wear swimming trunks in my own pool. That wouldn't be a problem at all. When I get into the ice bath in the mornings, which I guess some people could call a spiritual practice or spiritual ritual as well, I wouldn't put that label on it, but I'm not mad at someone else who does. I don't put shorts on to get into the ice bath this morning. Or when I'm in the sauna, I don't put shorts on. But when I'm in a public pool, I'm courteous and toward others. And so I put on my swimming trunks that are comfortable to me. But also I put some earplugs in because I don't like getting water in my ears. I don't like getting swimmer's ear. And that's a real problem for me. For other people, not really a problem. However, when I go to the pool and I see other people swimming, many of them have other accessories. They wear the goggles, swimming goggles. They have the cap on top of their head to make them more aerodynamic or so their hair doesn't get in the way. Totally understand that. There are other people who have flippers or little boards they use, they hold in their hands. And there are a bunch of different accoutrements that people have. And my first inclination is to be like, you don't need that. Why don't you be more of a minimalist? Isn't that just swimming clutter? Well, for them, the answer is probably no. I don't know for sure. For some of them, maybe they would benefit by removing that for a period of time and recognizing that maybe their swim is enhanced by the removal of some of these accessories. However, their swim might be enhanced by the addition of some of these accessories. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like the way you own your use of things and you validate anyone who needs things in order to be the artist or the creator or the healthy person that they want to be. And what I'm getting out of what you're saying is like, hey, look, I use all of this stuff. And the reason that I'm really good at delineating what sorts of things I need, and the reason I'm good at keeping those things organized, being able to access them when I need them, is because I don't have anything getting in the way of that. When physicists talk about, when they study like particles and so on, they never refer to that as clutter. They call it matter. They call it energy. And there's a reason for that, because energy and matter is not the same thing as clutter. Clutter is anytime you have energy in your life that gets in the way of the things that matter the most, right? So having a pair of socks isn't clutter. You can't just take something because it is physical and define it as clutter. If that were the case, then our own bodies would be clutter. The earth itself would be clutter, but our bodies are not clutter. The earth is not clutter. There's nothing wrong with matter or things of physical substance. The question always is, what is my relationship to this stuff? Am I on autopilot or am I being intentional? And it sounds like with you, with all the things you just described, you're being very intentional about them and they're supplementing your life. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. And so let's get to Cardinal's question, because I sense a sense of angst or maybe just some underlying anxiety around the accoutrements of their spiritual practice here, right? Because at first we feel compelled. I'm reminded, if I take this outside of the spiritual world, although people call this a spiritual practice as well, I do yoga regularly. And I have some friends, when they first start yoga, it's more about buying the accessories for yoga than it is the practice of yoga. If I get the really nice pants, if I get the best yoga mat, and of course I need the blocks and the balls and the yoga strap, and there's nothing wrong with any of those things. But do I actually need them? Will they enhance that experience, or am I just playing yoga? Is it yoga dress up, or is it something that is enhancing my life in some way? And so when I think about Cardinal's question, whether it is the candles or the statues or the card decks or the oils or beads or any other accessory that you might have, does it markedly enhance the activity? And the way to find whether or not it adds value is to remove it for a period of time. You can do a packing party with your own spiritual items, your spiritual accessories, right? And determine, oh, you know what? I actually miss this. Well, why do I miss it? Oh, that's an important question. Do I miss it because it's habit and I'm just always used to having that card deck here or that statue here? Or do I miss it because, you know what? It actually did serve some sort of purpose in this spiritual practice.
Absolutely. And another way you can test it is not only give it up for a while and see if you can make it without it, but also test yourself by seeing what you're willing to give up in order to make place for it in your life. This works very well with children, by the way. A great alternative to just telling them no if they want something really expensive or they seem like they're entitled in their request is to simply assign a realistic, honest cost to it and then give them the power to choose based on their own innate ability to prioritize. So a kid says, I want that. All right. Are you willing to give up $1 for it? Oh, no, I don't really care about it that much. Oh, I want that. Okay. Are you willing to give up your TV time for that? Or are you willing to spend 5 minutes on that? Oh, I want the dog. Okay. You can have the dog. Are you willing to take the dog for a walk every day and pick up the poop? Oh, I don't really want it that much, right? Sometimes we say we want something and we really mean it, but we mean it in the abstract. What we really mean is, hey, I kind of get a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling when I think about having that. And that's a great starting point. You certainly want to look for that warm, fuzzy feeling. At the same time, if you're not willing to pay a cost for it, if you're not willing to give up anything else for it, then that means that, hey, you might enjoy it to a certain extent, but it's not a priority for you.
I think that's spot on. Recently, my daughter, who just turned 11, she dislikes doing her math and reading homework. We unschool her, but then we have this curriculum. We used to use something called Kumon. It didn't work well for her. I've seen it work well for other kids. It just didn't work well for Ella. And I could tell that she just disliked it, like strongly disliked it, and would throw a fit and not lash out, but you could tell like there was this inner turmoil. It was like an inner fit that was going on with her. She simply disliked doing that work. And so eventually we had to find a different app that worked better for her, where she would actually speak the words back as she was reading them. And it was a much better fit for her. But what I realized is at first I thought, oh, she just dislikes doing difficult things. But then she proved that wasn't true, because there was one day where I was getting into the ice bath, which is pretty difficult. Mal, you've been over to my house. You've gotten in the ice bath before.
That is most definitely one of the most difficult things to do for me. I don't react to cold very well.
And so it's 33 degrees, and she sees me get in there all the time. And the longest she'd ever been in, it was like 5 seconds. She dipped in, panicked, got out, right? And yet, when it came to doing her Kumon homework, the math and the reading and the writing, I said, you know what? I'll trade you. I will do your Kumon for you tonight if you can get into the ice bath for 2 minutes.
2 minutes is a century in an ice bath.
It really is. And yet she was like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, that's fine. You can just do it. And she's like, no, I'll do it. And she goes, she's never been in there for more than 5 seconds. She gets in, she hops out like, right after 5 seconds. I'm like, she's like, is that enough? I'm like, no, you have to do the full 2 minutes. And you have to dunk your head afterward. And she's like, I can't do it. I'm like, that's fine. You can do the homework. We know you can do that. You just don't enjoy it. She's like, I don't enjoy this either. That's fine. We get to pick what difficult things we want to do. It's your decision. She goes, okay, I really, really don't want to do the math. And so she gets in the ice bath. She just sits there for 2 minutes. And she gets out afterward. And she goes, I feel so alive. And that was the point of the ice bath for her. It shows that you can feel so alive after doing difficult things. And I think at our best, many spiritual practices are difficult. All of man's problems stem from his inability to sit quietly in an empty room, according to Pascal, right? And yet, that's one of the most difficult things to do, but it can be one of the most rewarding when you're on the other side of the drudgery or the pain or even the suffering. We talked about this a couple episodes with Jack Conte. To be passionate about something means to be willing to suffer for it, right? Yeah. But the unexpected benefit for Ella wasn't that she didn't have to do her homework. It's that she was so alive afterwards. She goes, I feel so good right now. Yeah. Why don't I do this more often? Oh, why don't I do difficult things more often? However, and I suspect, TK, this is where we might diverge a little bit, and this will be an interesting discussion. I think most spiritual practices are nonsense.
What's that? What's your guy's name? Kapil.
Kapil Gupta, yes.
That's the Kapil pill. Some people take the red pill. Josh took the Kapil pill. I sound like I'm rapping. Give me that Kapil pill.
And so what I've learned is quite often we're looking for a prescription or a template. And those things work really well in mechanical or practical or cosmetic or superficial arenas. So for example, I've been having this issue with my shoulder. That's why I actually started swimming. It wasn't a spiritual practice for me to start swimming, although I did learn that there is maybe some elements of a spiritual practice from doing that every day and getting comfortable with my breath and getting in sync with my body and staying in touch and letting the thoughts go. There is a spiritual element to it. But the mechanics of it is why I started. And so the how-tos or the prescriptions or the templates work really well for those mechanical things, for those practical things, for those superficial things to help with my shoulder pain. The mechanics of physical therapy can really help, right? That sort of practice. However, I think most people embark on these spiritual endeavors because of some sort of deep suffering that is going on within inside them. You've experienced this. You converted to Catholicism a few years ago after being a non-denominational Christian for a very long time. And you decided to make that shift. And we could talk about why, but I'm sure you've seen other people, not as a judgment, but you see people who are really suffering and they reach for the first thing that's available to them. And for some people, that's Jesus. For some people, it is statues and Ouija boards and oils and beads. For other people, it is a yoga practice. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. But it's like putting a Band-Aid on an axe wound. If I were to saw off your arm right now, TK, a Band-Aid might hurt or might help 0.1%, but it's not actually going to fix your suffering. We need to do something more dramatic. And quite often, when we pick up a spiritual practice, it apes the form of doing something for our suffering, but it just covers it up temporarily. And that suffering continues to grow within us.
Yeah, I think the underlying message here is that anything can become a hiding place that you use to run away from a confrontation with truth. Anything can be that. And some people respond to their suffering by resorting to religion. Some people respond to their suffering by resorting to violence or to partying or to drinking, to busyness, to activity, to trying to make a lot of money, whatever it may be. And that doesn't mean any of those things are bad. Nothing wrong with hanging out with friends, having a drink, working hard, making money. But why are you doing those things? Are you doing those things because there's something else you feel like you ought to do? Something else your conscience is demanding that you do, and you're just doing that because it's easier, it's more familiar, it's a way to run. I think that is true with everything. I would say, however, is that having a robust philosophy of suffering is an important aspect of life, and I think it's one of the things that's missing from a lot of popular discussion on self-help and personal development. Life isn't just about becoming the best version of yourself or trying to be healthy. It's also about learning how to cope with and frame and process that experience which we call suffering, or rather, the experience of pain and the way we relate to pain in a manner that transforms it into suffering. And when we suffer, we've got to run to something. And I pray that we're running towards truth. And so the real question is, are we running towards something that is true, something that is good? I know for me, when it comes to things and spirituality, so in the Catholic worldview, there's something called incarnational theology. And it's sort of a response, if you will, to a philosophy called dualism, which basically says body, evil, spirit, good, matter, bad, immaterial, intangible things, good and holy, right? And this can lead to all sorts of problems with how we relate to our own bodies, how we relate to the material world, and so on. But incarnational theology says, all right, when God created the world, he created everything good. So sunlight, holy, not just innocent, not just okay, but actually holy, a real true expression of divine creativity. Trees, mountains, rocks, streams, water, squirrels, bears, this stuff is holy. Now, we can have a relationship with these things or a perception of these things that makes them seem neutral or irrelevant or having nothing to do with spirituality, but really, these things are sacred. And the world is not there to be ran from or to be transcended, but it's there to be redeemed and reclaimed. It's there to be beautified by our acts of love, our acts of reverence, our acts of creativity. And this is expressed in the spirituality. And so we have a spirituality that involves things. It doesn't depend on things in the sense of like, hey, you can't possibly pray unless you make the sign of the cross, or you can't possibly connect with God unless you're inside of a church, or unless you're dipping your finger in the holy water. No, you can do all of those things. You can connect with God at the beach. You can connect with God at your home. You don't need things, but things have a role of reminding us of what's important and also rooting us in the fact that our spirituality is never to become so distant, so internalized that we reduce ourselves to brains in a vat who become righteous merely because we are proud of the accuracy and refinement and precision in our theology. And that's where you get into the attitude of, I can treat you like crap because my theological arguments are so good. And so I don't have to respect your body because your body isn't important.
And
I don't have
treating you like crap also gets me more clicks these days as well, right? And so there's I think that component, when you layer that in, there's the performative component of the spirituality, which is often enhanced, at least seemingly, by the accoutrements.
Yeah.
I sent you a picture. I was just at the Santa Barbara Art Museum, and there was on the wall this picture of St. Francis. And I love everything you're talking about because you're explaining it in religious terms, but you're explaining it to someone who is relatively secular. And yet I can still tweeze out the value of what you're saying. Because I can also recognize that when you say God or I say God, we might be talking about different things. I don't know for sure. But what I can tell you is that I can still benefit from the understanding that you have about suffering and connecting to the universe or nature or whatever you want to call it. But anyway, I sent you this picture of St. Francis, and he's got this really awesome looking robe. Looks like it was designed by Kanye West himself. And he's in this moment of prayer, and he's holding this skull in his hand. So I guess he has a accessory there. And maybe that's the memento mori, you are going to die. And this is what a great reminder of death, holding a human skull in your hand. But it doesn't mean that he can't pray without the robe and the skull. He could pray ideally just as well. It's just those accessories might enhance that ritual that he's experiencing. It might enhance the experience of prayer itself.
Exactly. And none of it stems from a sense of necessity, but rather a deeper understanding of the role of things. Like someone may say to me, I have on my arm a chaplet, and someone may say, hey, you don't need a rosary to pray. And I would say, I totally agree, man. I also don't need to shake your hand or look you in the eyes when I talk to you. Ooh. But I do, not because I have to, not because I think I'm going to be punished if I avoid those things, but because I understand something about what it means to interact with the person. And when I look you in the eye and I shake your hand and I give you a hug, that comes from a place of understanding, not from a place of fear, right? And so whether it's the holy water, I have icons in my home. I have a necklace that I wear with my confirmation saint, Saint Monica. I've got a brown scapular, like things. I love things, not because my power is located in things, or that if those things were lost, or if my house burned down, God forbid, that, oh no, where's God? My icon of Mary is gone. Where's God? The cross in my home is gone. Where's God? God still remains. These things are there as reminders for me of what's important. They're sacramentals in the sense that they help cultivate a certain interior disposition that I can then carry over into every area of my life, which is what allows me to experience God in the mountains, experience God in the beach. And not just that, but also driving through the ghetto, experiencing him around scary people, experiencing him around people who smell bad, experiencing him around people that I feel are irritating, experiencing him around people that push my buttons. Those things as well. And I think things can play a role in that way.
You're talking about reminders of the divine in some way, right? And just like the handshake analogy that you used a moment ago, which I think is perfect, because yes, it's possible to talk to someone without shaking their hand or without looking them in the eye. It's also possible to have way too much of that, right?
Yeah.
I can shake your hand for 5 seconds, and that might start to feel like it's a bit long. But if I shake your hand for 5 minutes and 5 seconds, it's going to be like, why won't this guy let go of me? There's too much going on here. And I think that's when we get to the essence of Cardinal's question. It's about, do I have too much? versus, well, what is enough? And I think it comes down to that. It comes down to two questions for me. What is enough? And the only way I can figure that out is by temporarily depriving myself, not getting rid of the things, but removing them for a period of time, and ask myself, what is enough? And the other question I ask myself is, what am I doing this for? Why this spiritual practice? No matter what it is, whether it's swimming or yoga or Catholicism or Hinduism or perennialism or quietism, whatever your so-called spiritual practice is, why am I doing it? Is it to numb the suffering? Is it to understand the suffering? Is it to conquer and eliminate the suffering? Well, you get to decide, right? And then I get to determine what is enough and how much is too much. Because if it's too much, that is the clutter. And then we're talking about spiritual clutter. If you have too many accessories, it might actually get in the way of the experience itself.
Yeah, that's so good, man. That's right on the money. Why I think of, I'll bring it just back to my religion, a moment where Jesus is talking to his disciples and says, "Who do men say that I am?" And they said, "Oh, well, some people say this is who you are. And some other people say that, you're this prophet. Other people say you're the reincarnation of this person." And he says, "Well, who do you say that I am?" And that's when it really hits home, right? And so what you do and how you show up has to boil down to something a lot more deeper and more fundamental than, well, what do other people say? What do Josh and TK think about this?
Right. Will this impress other people?
Yeah.
And quite often we get all the yoga accoutrements or all the Wiccan or witch accoutrements or all the Christian accoutrements or all of the swimming accoutrements because not because it's going to enhance my practice or my ability to access the divine or ease my suffering or whatever my why is here, but because it's going to impress other people. Look at me. I'm the most spiritual. I'm the most religious. I am the best religious person in the world. Well, that's just a type of consumerism. It's spiritual consumerism. Consumerism is the ideology that buying more things will make you better. And if we look at that in the normal consumer world, it can be square footage, or luxury cars, or gold chains, or diamonds, or purses, or dresses, or really expensive shoes. Look how much better I am. But in the spiritual world, there are two types of consumerism. There's the buying all of the accoutrements, because look how impressive I am. I'm the most spiritual. There's the flip side of that. It's inverse spiritual consumerism. I've let go of everything.
Yeah.
Look how much better I am because I abstain from everything.
Yeah.
I live the life of an ascetic, and it proves to you that I am the best spiritual person in the world.
Or perhaps a common form of what I call social media religion is, look at me, man. I'm above it all. I'm smarter than it all. I'm better than it all. And I'm the only one out here that's not deceived by whatever it is y'all fools are deceived by. Oh yeah, I am smart enough to realize that everybody's wrong about that particular ism, or that everybody's wrong about that. And I don't need anything. I don't have any ideas, any beliefs, any feelings, any vulnerabilities, any desires. That too can become a kind of its own religion, which is just another way of hiding. It's another form of consumerism in a certain different sort of way.
Cardinal, if you ask those questions that we talked about earlier, what is enough and why am I doing this? Ultimately, you'll get down to figuring out what your boundaries are. If you need help determining those boundaries, download our free minimalist rulebook. You can check it out at theminimalists.com/rulebook. It's a free ebook, beautifully designed by our friends over at Spire Media. Dave and Jeff over there are savants of development and design. Love those guys. You can download it for free. We also have an audio book version of the Minimalist Rulebook over there, theminimalists.com/rulebook. Also, Cardinal, we let go of something that was dear to us recently. It was the video version of the podcast. And Cardinal mentioned that, hey, I used to watch you guys, but I'm happy to listen to you on Spotify now. I've got good news for anyone who listens to the private podcast, our longer form version of the podcast. It is coming to Spotify soon as well. You still subscribe through Patreon. You can listen on any podcast player, whether it is Apple Podcasts or Overcast or Feedly or Podcatcher. There are quite a few podcast players that people get value from. The one place you can't get it right now is Spotify, but that's changing really soon because Spotify is this walled garden. We've been working with the fine folks over at Patreon and Spotify, so you can listen to our entire private podcast wherever you want. You can listen on the Patreon app as well, but if you want to listen on Spotify, Cardinal, you'll be able to do that really soon. Before we get back to our callers, Malabama, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It's time for the lightning round, where we answer the Patreon community chat's question of the week.
Yes, indeed. Now, during the lightning round, we each have 60 seconds to answer your question with a short, shareable, less than 140 character response. We call them minimal maxims. We put them in the show notes over at theminimalists.com, so you can copy and share our pithy answers with your friends and family. You can share it on social media if you like. And by the way, we put all of those minimal maxims each week in the email that we send out to anyone who's on our newsletter. You can subscribe for free over at theminimalists.email. We'll start your week off with a bit of simplicity. 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 minimal maxims for the week. Some pithy aphorisms to simplify your life. What is our question of the week this week, Malabama?
What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the term spirituality?
Oh, I've had different answers for this over time. I think I was quite cynical with respect to that term, spirituality.
Is that right?
Yeah, for the longest time. Because of what I was talking about earlier, most spirituality feels like nonsense to me. Seems like nonsense. And sometimes it even seems like an excuse to not deal with our very real problems. It's to cover them up with something that looks like it's doing something. It's the Band-Aid analogy from earlier, but I think it's even worse than the Band-Aid analogy because it seems like I'm actually doing something. I'm becoming a better version of myself. And so I was a bit cynical before.
Interesting.
Especially with respect to spirituality.
Yeah.
Or even the term religion, right?
Now, do you consider those two the same? Because I've always heard spirituality as like, when people say I'm spiritual, it's usually never just as a standalone statement. It's usually I'm more spiritual than religious, or I'm spiritual, not religious. And I usually hear that as, hey, look, I have a sense of consciousness of something higher, or a sense of reverence, or a deep relationship to like creative energy or something along those lines. But I don't go to church. And I'm not committed to the creeds or dogmas of any particular faith. I've always kind of heard it in that way.
Yes, I that's how I used to think about it now. But now I'm so much more open to both of those things. Not from a dogmatic standpoint or even a standpoint of ideology, but from wisdom. There are so many wisdom traditions, whether I look at ancient Hinduism or Buddhism, Jesus Christ himself. I mean, one of the most powerful lines in the history of humanity is forgive them for they know not what they do. Oh, that applies to my life now. If I feel like I've been wronged, it'd be just as wrong for me to then resent that person because they don't know what they're doing. Oh, yes, they do. They really don't. Could they have done it differently? It doesn't even make sense when you break that question down. Yes, perhaps they could have in some alternate timeline, but they didn't. Should they have done something different? Does that even make sense, right? And so I look at the ancient wisdom traditions. I'm still skeptical of religion. I'm still skeptical of spirituality, but it's a healthy skepticism. It means I'm not willing to just allow you to hand a template to me and say, this is the way that things are. That's what happens with a cult. When things go too far in a cult, here's how you should believe. Yeah. Well, why? Because this is how you should believe. Oh, that reasoning does not work for me.
I like that word cult because I think the whole world has become a cult. Once upon a time, you would often hear other branches of knowledge differentiate themselves from religion precisely by saying, hey, this isn't about what accepting an authority figure tells you. This is about what you can test for yourself, what you can observe for yourself. This is about evaluating your own experience and like taking that seriously. And now I think we live in a culture where people deviate more and more from argumentation, intellectually honest debate, sitting down, discussing controversial ideas. And it's more a matter of, let me just mock you and shame you if you don't believe the thing that I've decided is the right thing. As I heard someone say, we've moved from, hey, I believe you're a good person with bad ideas to, I believe you're a bad person because of those ideas.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a great distinction there, right? Because what we do, and this is a type of spiritual clutter, I think cynicism is a type of clutter even, right? Skepticism is one thing. It means I'm not just willing to accept anything that you hand to me and continue to hold on to it. I'll entertain the idea. Even something like the flat earth. Like, to me, at first, that's easy to dismiss. But if I'm just going to dismiss it without even thinking about it, then I'm being just as dogmatic about. And so, yes, I can entertain a conversation with someone who believes in flat Earth. I'd love to hear, by the way, if anyone listening to this believes in flat Earth, show me the best argument for that. And I mean that in a skeptical way, but not in a cynical way.
Well, now that you put that out there, you're going to get it, brother. You're going to get a whole lot of emails. But here's the funny thing about that discussion and what you're saying. Let's take the scientists out of it, right? Because the majority of people are not scientists, even though in the last 5 years that has changed and everyone is claiming to be one or pretending to be one. If you take the scientists out of it and just take the average person, if you randomly select it from people who claim to believe in, we'll call it oblate spheroid, as Neil deGrasse Tyson describes it, that the Earth is a oblate spheroid. And then if you take at random people who claim to believe in flat Earth, and then you say, all right, go into a room and debate. I would put my money that in most cases, the person who believes in flat Earth is going to be more eager for the debate, and they're going to be more argumentative, and they're going to have more stuff to say. And the person who disavows flat Earth is going to rely more on mockery and shaming and rolling their eyes and being like, I can't believe that you even believe that.
And thus they lose the debate on just on appearances alone, right?
Right. And before anybody says, oh, well, you're arguing for flat Earth. No, actually, I'm arguing for something different. Part of the problem with taking your belief to be so obvious that you can rely solely on shaming rather than getting in the ring and debating things, especially when you hide behind, oh, I'm not going to dignify that belief which is beneath me by even addressing it logically, is that you lose the teaching opportunity for other people who think like you and for other people that you want to know the truth. You lose the opportunity to show them that it's not just about having the right beliefs. It's about holding those beliefs in a way that is logical, in a way that is sound, in a way that can be substantiated. Education isn't about telling people what's true and saying, because I told you so. Education is about teaching people what's true and saying, and here's why this truth doesn't depend on my believing it. Here's how you can hold me accountable as a teacher that's older than you and more experienced than you to something that is even higher than myself. And if I ever deviate from these standards, you can take me to task because the truth doesn't rely on me being the person that told it to you. It's true because of these reasons. And we got to get back to this place where we just rely on the easy thing of shaming people because they say things that sound absurd. Because even if it is absurd, you want to get in that freaking ring and you want to show that it's absurd by giving reasons that substantiate the truth. And now you teach people not just how to defend it, but how to reason about it clearly.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think if Malabama came to you today and she was like, hey, TK, I think the Earth is flat, you wouldn't try to shame her. You would, that'd be the cynicism side of it. Oh, what an idiot, right?
Yeah.
You would get curious about it. And that is the healthy skepticism side.
And I think if you get most people private in a one-on-one discussion and you went up to a friend and was like, hey, I believe in this, they'd be like, really? For real? Why?
That tone is pregnant with shame.
But that's okay because that tone can also be like, for real? I'm so surprised because what I think is so obviously true and what you think is so obviously wrong to me, I'm shocked, but tell me why. But it's when you bring in the crowd, it's what we're afraid other people are going to think about us,
yes.
Right? That's the basis for a lot of these reactions. It's discussions change so powerfully and dramatically when you take the crowd away. Because the moment you put the crowd in there, we're all afraid about how people might misunderstand us, what they might think of us for endorsing this or that position, and how they might ostracize us and shame us. But I think most people, when you get them alone and you talk to them, you can inspire them to be a little bit more curious, even if that's something that they've been disconnected from for a while. My 2 cents.
I think that's spot on. Let's get back to the question itself.
All right. That's the longest lightning round introduction ever.
The question here is, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the term spirituality? TK, give me something pithy.
What comes to my mind is the observation that spirituality is who we are, not what we do. There is no spiritual ritual so amazing and so great and so life-giving that its power can't be negated by your being completely disconnected from it. It's possible to make the sign of the cross. It's possible to close your eyes when you pray. It's possible to sit in the lotus position and still be a complete jerk who lacks compassion, whose heart is callous towards other people, who doesn't embody that spirituality in any meaningful way when it comes to going out into the real world. And it's also possible to be anti-ritual and to say, I don't do any of those things and still have a heart that's closed. Ultimately, practices come and go. Practices are beautiful, but spirituality is about the inner disposition. It's about being open to grace, open to love.
And I love what you're saying there, because it doesn't require that you do anything. It also doesn't require that you have anything for your spiritual practice. Yes, there are some accessories that may enhance it in some way. Just like my swimming, those earplugs, I don't have to have them, but they do make that experience better. And so when I think about spirituality, I come from the other side of it, and I think that every ideology comes prepackaged with clutter. And so if someone just hands you a spiritual practice and you don't ask any questions about it, you don't get curious about it, you don't get healthfully skeptical about it, then you'll just accept something like, oh, here's what I'm supposed to do, without knowing why you're doing what you do. Well, that is clutter. If you're just handed an ideology and you're not willing to question it because you'll be ostracized by the group, or just because it's easier to not question things, right? That might sound like it's true, but it's actually way more difficult on the long run if you're not willing to ask those questions. The other thing I'll say is nonsense is always nonsensical, even if it looks good on a bumper sticker. And so this is the most difficult thing about the show that we do. I write out these minimal maxims. We put them over there in the show notes. They're also at minimalmaxims.com. And I think if I am remembered for one thing well after my death, it'll probably be these little pithy, simple living aphorisms that we've come up with over the years. And most of my writing now sort of involves these different aphorisms, but a lot of time goes into it. When I see other people try to do it, there are some people who do it masterfully. In fact, on the private podcast later on, we're going to talk about the 5 most popular quotes from Waking Up. And I really enjoy those. And all of those will look great on a bumper sticker or a billboard, but most bumper stickers and billboards are nonsense. They're nonsensical. And I think it's one of the most difficult things we do here is trying to communicate something broad and complex and filled with truth, but in a way that is packaged that I can hold on to that, I can see that, I can know what you mean by it. It reminds me of this quote from Dan Quayle. He said, oh my gosh, I have it written down here. If we don't succeed, we run the risk of failure. And like,
I love that.
At first, we call those faux fundities because at first it sounds profound. Like, yeah, that makes, wait a minute. That's a tautology, right? Like, of course, if we don't succeed, we run the risk of failure. By the way, if you do succeed, you also run the risk of failure. And so it's really difficult to try to sum something up, love people and use things because the opposite never works. And you can argue against that, but when you get the essence of it, it's hard to state something in a sentence or two that someone can pick up not just what you're saying, but the essence of what you're saying. And so when I think about spirituality, I think of there's a whole lot of nonsense out there. There's a whole lot of clutter, a lot of spiritual clutter, a lot of ritual clutter, a lot of religious clutter. But there's something true within that. There's something true within Jesus or Buddha, or you look at the Upanishads and you go back to these ancient wisdom traditions. There's a lot of truth there. There are all of these nuggets of gold, but sometimes you have to sift through a whole lot of sediment in order to get to those gold nuggets. Malabama, before we move on here, some of our patrons, they weighed in on this. Actually, hundreds of them weighed in on this. You can let us know as well. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the term spirituality? Head on over to Patreon, the community chats over here. Let's talk about a few of these that people said. Trevor and Terry, I think their 2 points of view contrast with one another.
Trevor said, belief in something you don't currently have the tangible, concrete, scientific details to explain with logic. But contrasted with Terry, they said positive, non-physical experiences that can connect sentient beings.
Yeah, so let's talk about that really quickly, TK. The belief in something you don't currently have the tangible, concrete, scientific details to explain. That's what Trevor thinks spirituality is. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, my thought is that's a fantastic description of what Trevor thinks spirituality is. I mean, obviously Trevor isn't here, and him and I, are not about to have a debate about this. But one thing I would say is I had the late Quentin Smith, who was one of my philosophy professors, who was an atheist. I remember there was a time in class where he asked a question and an atheist answered. And he stepped back and he says, let me just say this. Don't think for a second that just because I'm an atheist and you're an atheist, that I'm going to accept something you say as true or allow you to just mock the theistic point of view because we share the same beliefs. As a philosophy professor, my job is to not just evaluate the rightness of your conclusion, but also the rightness of your logic. And I'm going to tell you now, some of the best philosophers in the world today are Christians. And if some of you guys had to debate these dudes, they would mop the floor with you. And so I think it's important to always just keep a certain reverence for the fact that on both sides or all sides of every debate, there are hundreds of people that would mop the floor with me in a debate that are smarter than me. And so there are a lot of people who see it that way, who are smarter than me. And there are a lot of people who are prepared to actually, now, of course, you're going to disagree with them, right? Of course, like if you define spirituality that way, we already know that the two of you aren't going to end this debate agreeing with each other. But there are some people that professionally, full time, they argue all the time that there are tangible, concrete, scientific details that can be explained with logic for different kinds of spiritual beliefs, not just Christianity, but all different sorts of religions and spirituality. And some of these people are very well thought and very good. So, but anyway, the purpose of this is to get other people's points, not to debate their points.
Sarah said interconnectedness. That's what she thinks of when she hears the term spirituality. And to that, I would say, what about interconnectedness? So maybe my contrast with that is, yes, there's an interconnectedness with the earth, with the world, with the universe, and maybe we can call it non-dual thinking. There's that interconnectedness. It's all connected, all is one. But I think you could flip that around and say there's also this interconnectedness. Right now, especially with all of the noise, it's really hard to be connected with one's self. We often feel so disconnected, not just from the world around us, but because of the world around us, we feel disconnected with ourselves.
Can I ask you about that real quick?
Sure.
Man? I'm hearing a lot of fatigue towards self-love.
Ooh.
I'm hearing a lot of folks talk about now this idea that, like, man, aren't we just a little over inundated with self-love? Like, how about thinking about something other than what's going on with you? How about looking out for somebody other than you and your immediate needs and your immediate family? Like, it seems like we might be more at the risk of being so inward now that all we think about is our own pleasure. I get what you're saying about self-awareness is lacking, but like, aren't we moving in the direction of just being so inwardly focused that interconnectedness only really matters to us when there's something I can get out of you? What do you think of that?
I think that pleasure thing is also a chase that covers up the interconnectedness. And you could call it self-love. I think most people have no idea what love is, so we don't need to go back onto that tangent.
Me and Bam are just rolling our eyes.
I'll take it a step further. Most people don't know what the self is either. And so if I ask you, who are you? you're listening to this podcast right now, who are you? You might give me 15 adjectives to describe you. If I could tell you, I'm Joshua Fields Milburn. Okay, that's my name. I'm 6'2". Okay, there are a lot of people who are 6'2", right? 6'5" with the hair, of course. And I could tell you that, well, I am right-handed. I am married. I live in Ojai, California, and I record a podcast. I write daily, but that's not who I am, right? And so when you're talking about this idea of self-love or interconnectedness, it's about understanding oneself. And quite often the way we discover that is to discover the false self, the ego. What is the ego? All these things that I think I am, all these titles that I heap onto me. And so if there is this thing called spirituality, I think what it helps us do is look at the ego and see it for what it is. It is the false self. A bunch of other people responded to this as well. You can check it out and you can let us know your thoughts as well. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the term spirituality? Head on over to Patreon, hop in the community chat. It's like, that's how social media is supposed to be for me.
And you got to read Andy's, and Trevor will probably appreciate this one. I'm not bashing you either, Trevor. I think your opinion needs to be on the record, but I think he'll appreciate Andy's. Andy's is a new store/trend/online guru with marketing babble, so you'll purchase their whatever and solve all your problems. But maybe I've lived in LA and NYC for too long.
I could tell you that's how I used to look at spirituality as well. Like it was all nonsense. And I didn't realize that below that sediment, there was some true gold, some truth that sits beneath all of the babble and the gurus and all of this other stuff. There's some peace underneath all of the spiritual clutter. All right, TK, we're just getting started. We have a troop of callers to talk to, but first, real quick for right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the minimalist. Did you know the minimalists have 10 free resources on our website? Everything from our downloadable 30-day minimalism game calendar and minimalist wallpapers for your smartphone and computer to our beautifully designed ebooks like my 15 Ways to Write Better ebook and TK's Emotional Clutter ebook, all of which you can download for free at theminimalists.com/resources. Alabama, what else you got for us?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
Dear Minimalists, my name is Jem, and my top tip for your listeners is to have an app a day. That's right, not an apple a day, but an app a day. That way, rather than feeling pangs of guilt and regret for the amount of time you've spent scrolling through your phone on various applications, you choose just one and dip into it each day for 5 or so minutes. That way, you feel like you're keeping abreast of things without that terrible nagging sense of, I could be using my time for something more positive. Keep up the good work. Lots of love from the UK.
Joanna, thank you for that unique insight. For anyone else who has a listener tip or an observation about this episode or any other episode, leave a comment on YouTube or Patreon, or better yet, send a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com so we can feature your voice on the show. All right, that's the first 42% of episode 446. We'll see you on Patreon for the full Maximal edition with Ryan Nicodemus, which includes answers to a bunch more questions. Questions like, how do I let go of the pain from the past and still hold on to the lessons I learned from that pain? What can we do when our religious beliefs conflict with our values? How can I have a relationship with my religious parents if I'm repulsed by their religion? Plus, a million more questions and simple living segments over on the Minimalist private podcast. We also have an outstanding home tour from one of our listeners this week on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/theminimalist or click the link down in the description to subscribe and get your personal link so that our weekly Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You'll also gain access to all of our podcast archives all the way back to episode 001. By the way, Patreon is now offering free trials, so if you'd like to test drive our private podcast, you can join for 7 days for free. And that is our minimal episode for today. If you leave here with just one message, let it be this: love people, use things. Because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Every little thing you think that you need. Every little thing you think that you need. Every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.